Hello, welcome to this video tutorial. I'm Mrs. Cook, an A-level sociology teacher, and this is a model answer in minutes for one of the debate questions that could come up on paper 3, question number 5. It's all about postmodernism, and I know that is a topic that a lot of people dread. So let's have a look at this past student's top band answer for evaluate the view that society today should be described as postmodern. So let's get straight into it. An introduction should basically be very brief and define any key concepts in the question. So this is asking us to look at the view that society is described as postmodern. So 70% of our essay really should be saying it is a postmodern society. So in the introduction, this student has simply described a postmodern society and got a little bit of a comparison to modernity. So with a 20 marker, you've got about 35 minutes. So 3 to 4 decent chunky paragraphs on, yes, we live in a postmodern society is what you're kind of looking for. And this student has gone straight in with Leotard and the arguments around meta-narratives. So Leotard is a postmodernist who argues that one of the defining features of postmodern society is this idea that we no longer rely on big meta-narratives. So those modernist classic thinkers of Karl Marx, functionalism, they're no longer relevant in today's society because it's so postmodern and it's so diverse. So this student has taken us through this argument and has given a very clever example of healthcare. So once that was that we relied on science for health and it dominated our path to cure illness. However, in a modern society, or a postmodern, I should say, society, there's been a rise in people using different techniques when it comes to dealing with illness. And that is a very good example of how we're steering away of one dominant way of thinking, one meta-narrative way of dealing with things, and actually looking at alternatives. So this student takes us through that as an example, then goes back to Leotard and picks apart this idea of a postmodern society where we don't turn to one sort of meta-narrative. We don't have one big group of people with patterned behaviour, but rather lots of different people with different directions, different ideas of the right way to deal with things. So a very successful paragraph, very detailed. It links back to the question before evaluating. So let's have a look at the evaluation. Leotard is arguably self-contradictory. So by saying there's no longer a dominant way of thinking or a dominant theory that we all subscribe to, is that not a theory in itself? So it's self-contradictory. Moreover, some meta-narratives you cannot deny still have a very dominant place in our society, like capitalism. So we find ourselves in a society that is more and more dominated by inequality and power relations, and that is undeniable. So the evaluation is explicit, and the paragraph itself follows that Peel paragraph, and it's got plenty. If you stop the video, it's got plenty of theory, it's got plenty of concepts, so it's hitting that top band. The next paragraph, we again turn to somebody else who says we live in a postmodern society, and it's one of my favourites. It's Baudrillard and the use of simulacra. One of these key features that we've never had before in a modern society that we do have in a postmodern society is this feature of images and signs, or what Baudrillard calls simulacra. Now, this student takes us through what it is and how it is produced, how it is images that bear sometimes no relation to physical reality, and gives us some examples of hyperreality. So where we are spending most of our time nowadays in this kind of hyper reality world, and you cannot deny it. The student then links back to the question, of course, before evaluating again. So, however, some argue this is overly pessimistic, and that actually this idea that we are involving ourselves in hyperreality to the point where we can't really distinguish between reality and non-reality, although there's a lot of evidence, very convincing AI and fake news out there, we are becoming very much wise to this idea. And we are increasingly being able to distinguish. We're more skeptical of ideas when we see them, videos on TikTok and Facebook and social media. So arguably, we are becoming very wise to the fact that simulacra is out there, that's a feature to stay, and we are wary of it. This last postmodern society paragraph, what we see is Bormann and Bormann's idea of liquid, that term liquid. And this student gives us a really good definition of it. It's this idea that we are living in a society characterized by lots of diversity, and this student brings in the example of education and educational provision, talking about how there is so many different versions of education, different types of provision, different ways of educating people, more so than in a modern society, linking it to globalization and how it's changed policy. So a very good, strong argument that brings in a very good bit of application of education to support Borman's ideas, before linking it back and again a strong explicit evaluation. This idea that although we have lots of diversity, tradition is on the increase, and we can only need to look at Europe and European politics to see that actually right-wing politicians are becoming increasingly popular with their very traditional patterns of behaviour that we're seeing them put into their policies. So again, another very good explicit evaluation. And what this student does, which is very clever, is in their essay, they don't just stick to, yes, we live in a postmodern society. Of course, they bring in a counter argument. And for this, they've brought in Giddens, this idea that maybe it's overstated. Maybe we're not living in a postmodern society, but maybe it's something like a later phase of modernity. And so for this, the student has brought in Giddens' idea of high modernity and has linked it to structuration theory, which you probably would have come across with methods and theory. They've linked it back and again have an explicit evaluation. So another strong paragraph. Again, I would invite you to pause the video, have a good look, and just see how many concepts they've used, how many examples they've used to apply the idea of high modernity. And then you can start to see those skills involved in a top band answer. And of course, in the top band, you need a conclusion, something that you've hinted at throughout. And of course, this student has done exactly that. Overall, postmodernism is useful for highlighting change and diversity, something that we've mentioned throughout the essay, but it often overstates a break from modernity and ignores continuing inequalities and power. Again, something that has been a running theme in the explicit evaluation throughout this essay. So, a very strong conclusion. And there you have it. Do we live in a postmodern society? Under 8 minutes. This is your model answer in minutes.